My name's James and I paint minis. This is Spoon 37 Minis.
So in this video I'm going to show you some basic highlighting and shading techniques. I've got these Death Guard models painted with Death Guard green, and now I'm going to do something called dry brushing by mixing that base colour with the lighter Rakarth flesh and even lighter ceramite white colours. Now the standard starter brush is a bit too small for what we're doing, and dry brushing is very hard on brushes, so you really need to buy a dry brush. This is a Games Workshop M dry brush, but a variety of manufacturers have brushes suitable for the purpose. So as shown in the things that would have helped paint the first mini video, I'm going to pop him on a Games Workshop paint handle, and then I'm going to open the Death Guard green and the Rakarth flesh paints in order that I can mix them together. Now I've changed the camera position so you can see a little bit better what I'm actually doing on the palette. I'm using a cocktail stick to pull a bit of paint out of the pot and put it on the palette. The idea of using the cocktail sticks is so that I don't have to use one brush to dip in both paint pots and contaminate both of them. So I get it on the palette first and then use the sticks to stir them, and then I get it on the paintbrush. Now, as I'm mixing this, I'm noticing it's a bit too close to the Rakarth flesh colour, so I'm going to go and get a little bit more green, and again put that on the palette nearby. Unfortunately it's just out of shot, but it's just on the palette nearby, and then use the stick I was using before to mix that in. And then we'll have quite a desaturated green, but as you can see it's very similar to Death Guard green, it's just lighter. Now the trick with dry brushing unusually is not to get the brush wet first. So we've got the brush, we're just going to stick it straight in the paint, and then this is where it gets a little bit weird, we're going to now wipe it on the tissue as if we were finished. Now the idea is to wipe the majority of paint off so there's only paint trapped deep within the bristles. You will see why in just a moment. Now the idea here is to wipe the brush back and forth over the miniature, going completely past where you're trying to get the paint. So you're swiping it past every part, but you are touching it so that the idea is any raised surface goes deeper within the bristles and actually catches the paint that's still there. And this therefore is probably the single simplest technique you will learn for highlighting. Now, as you can see, you don't have to be terribly careful with this technique. You can go all over everywhere, but one obvious thing to point out is you do get a lot of overspill. So ideally you do this on mainly the main armor color, and then when you do the other details, you don't necessarily want to dry brush those because you might then stray onto the armor color you've just done. If I just compare what I've done, I've got this dry brushed miniature on the left hand side and one that has just the base colour on the right. As you can see, it's already made a significant difference. Now to take it a step further, we've got the Death Guard green, but now we have ceramite white to mix it with. I know some people are very against using pure white to mix with because it can end up very desaturated and very chalky. But in this case, I think with the already desaturated armor color, it won't be too much of a problem. As you can see on the palette, I've got them roughly 50-50. I tend to stick to 50-50 unless I have a good reason for doing any other ratio, and if I do any other ratio, I usually write down what I've done so that when I do the next miniature, I actually have some sort of frame of reference. As I'm just using the one brush for this, I've thoroughly cleaned it in between sessions, but the technique is exactly the same. You have the brush starting off dry, you dip it in the paint, and then you go to the tissue and wipe off the majority of paint as if you were finished, and then you're ready for dry brushing the lighter colour. Now the idea here is to be a little bit more careful, a little bit more sparing, so you'll see I'm not going quite as deep into the model. I'm trying to catch mostly the raised areas that were already a little bit highlighted, you know, the top of the helmet, the top of the shoulder guards, the knee pads that stick out, the front of the leg armour and so on and so forth. It really does catch very noticeably on these overlapping plates on the legs. Anything like that that has a lot of texture will really show up really well with dry brushing. You will find as you go along there's less and less paint in the brush, so you actually have to do a little more work and go a little deeper into the bristles, but it will keep working for some time. We have it against just the base colour, and then to lots of dry brushing. It's significantly improved compared to where it was. Now if you remember at the start I said I would teach you about shading and highlighting. How do you shade? Well, one of the simplest ways, and the first technique you should really learn about shading, is to use something that we call wash. As you can already see, this is a very transparent paint. It's designed to run into the recesses of the miniature, and it's transparent, so it doesn't obscure the things you painted, but it does make the recesses darker. And you'll notice almost immediately as I apply this with just the standard starter brush that it really boosts the contrast immediately, because of course we've done the light colours, now we're doing the dark colours. Now again, much like with dry brushing, you don't need to be terribly careful with what you're doing, because obviously if you get it on some other parts of the miniature at this point, you haven't really painted those parts yet, so it doesn't really matter terribly much. Obviously if you were applying shade to a small detail, you might need to be a little bit more careful about what you're doing. Okay, so continuing on, I have at this point done the majority of the model, so it's just really the sort of chest and upper torso area and the helm. And as you can see, by using Agrax Earthshade as a brown wash, you immediately get a lot more contrast than you had. You will find that as you're painting, you can get away with mainly just using black and brown washes in the Games Workshop range. That would be Agrax Earthshade, which is dark brown, and Normal Oil, which is black. But for example, if you were buying Army Painter paints, those would be dark tone and strong tone, and of course the imaginatively entitled Vallejo black wash and brown wash. There you go, that's that. That's how dry brushing and wash, and as you can see, compared to just the base colour, it's a tremendous improvement at this point. So that's it, basic dry brushing and wash technique.
Right, if you've watched this far, firstly thank you for watching. If you did like it, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell shaped icon so that you know when the next video will be coming out. I'm hoping to keep a release schedule of about 2 videos a month.